Police locate the head of murdered model Abby Choi. Sources say no policy changes for now on whether foreign domestic helpers have to declare their criminal conviction records. And the European Union imposes further sanctions on Russia. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The search for Abby Choi's missing body parts continues after her dismembered body was found in a village house in Tai Po. Sources say police have located the head in a soup pot that was removed earlier from the village house. They also found bloodstains on a private car that picked her up before she died. Meanwhile, 3 of the 4 people arrested have been charged.
Police continued their search at the Chung Kwan O Chinese Permanent Cemetery this morning. Officers brought along hiking tools and searched the slope above the water catchment, but there were no new findings. The search team switched to look for evidence at Lung Mei Village in Tai Po this afternoon. Drainage Services Department workers, equipped with salvage and sampling tools, also checked the pipes in the area. Abby Choi went missing on Tuesday and was last seen on Fo Chun Road, Tai Po. Before she was reported missing, Choi was planning to pick up her daughter, whom she shared with her ex-husband Alex Kwong. Following the murder, police interrogated Alex Kwong's brother, who was a driver working for Abby Choi, as well as his parents. It was revealed that there had been arguments over the handling of her financial assets, which led to the murder. Body parts were found in a unit in Lung Mei Village, Tai Po. Police sources say officers are still figuring out whether the village house was the primary crime scene. Latest findings show there were blood stains on the car that had picked up Abby Choi. Choi's ex-father-in-law and brother-in-law, suspected to have killed Choi, have been charged with murder. Her former mother-in-law, who knew about the plan, was charged with perverting the course of justice. The case will be mentioned in Kowloon City Magistracy tomorrow morning. Choi's ex-husband Alex Kwong was arrested in Tung Chung yesterday. Police said he was about to flee on board a speedboat. He was taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital, claiming he felt unwell. A good friend of the victim wrote on social media on behalf of Choi's current husband and in-laws, saying Choi was kind and humble, and he's grateful that she had come into his life.
The government said earlier that applicants of the Top Talent Pass scheme have to declare whether they have a criminal conviction record in their electronic application forms before giving them an entry visa. Starting tomorrow, the same criterion will also apply to applicants of 5 other talent immigration programs. Some foreign domestic helper agencies said they were requested to fill in a form declaring their clients have no previous conviction records. But sources said today there had been no changes to the policy in this regard. Mimosa Ngai has more.
One foreign domestic helper agency said they had been requested by the Immigration Department last week to ask applicants to confirm they have no criminal conviction records in the city or elsewhere. However, sources said the government bureaucrat involved has no plan to make such an adjustment. Some employer organizations supported the idea of having to make a declaration, saying it is necessary as it can ensure employers that their helpers have not committed crimes, such as child abuse. The declaration requirement came after a Chinese biophysicist, He Jiankui, was given a visa to enter Hong Kong under the Top Talent Pass scheme, despite his imprisonment in the mainland for illegal medical practice in connection with the gene-edited babies controversy a few years ago. Last week, the immigration authorities announced the adjustment to 5 talent admission schemes, including the General Employment Policy, Admission Scheme for Mainland Talents and Professionals, and Technology Talent Admission Scheme. Lam Chong Sing, the deputy chairman of the electoral panel on manpower, believes the adjustment will not increase the visa approval processing time, adding that the government can do more to show the public that it has a gatekeeper mechanism. Mimosa Nai, TVB News.
A Chinese fighter jet on Friday reportedly warned a U.S. Navy surveillance aircraft not to stay around Chinese airspace. The incident happened while U.S. journalists were aboard the American P-8A surveillance aircraft over the South China Sea, which Beijing claims sovereignty. According to several U.S. media outlets, the Chinese J-11 fighter jet was armed with 4 air-to-air missiles. It issued the warning when the U.S. aircraft was about 50 kilometers outside Chinese airspace over the South China Sea. The Chinese jet was later said to have escorted the U.S. plane for 15 more minutes before leaving. At one point, reports said the Chinese jet was just about 150 meters away from the U.S. plane. The European Union has vowed to increase pressure on Moscow until Ukraine is liberated as it adopted a 10th round of sanctions on Russia a day after the first anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. The United States announced sanctions on the mercenary Wagner Group while also unveiling $2 billion more in weaponry for Kiev. Meanwhile, the fighting continues with both sides raising the intensity in the east and northeast front lines. Nazvi Karim reports.
In eastern Donetsk, 5 civilians were reportedly injured. Ukraine armed forces fired rockets at Russian positions in northeast Kharkiv region, where tense battles continue. Russian forces are also continuing their push to capture the strategic city of Bakhmut in Donetsk. Moscow says it has most recently overrun the nearby towns of Berkhivka and Yahadny in their efforts to encircle Bakhmut. Away from the front lines, the European Union took further steps to weaken Russia economically by adopting a 10th package of sanctions against Moscow. We now have the most far-reaching sanctions ever, depleting Russia's war arsenal and biting deep into its economy, wrote European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Twitter. A total of 121 individuals and entities are listed in the new sanctions, which target Russia's banking sector, Moscow's access to military technology, as well as advanced technologies. Separately, the United States imposed sanctions on 11 individuals and 7 entities linked to the mercenary Wagner Group, which is fighting alongside Russian troops in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed the moves, saying sanctions will continue to be introduced so that nothing remains of the potential Russian aggression. Meanwhile, protests against the war erupted across Europe. In Berlin, a crowd of around 10,000 gathered to oppose the supply of more weapons to Ukraine in a protest organized by a left-wing party. In Prague, the Czech Republic, thousands of pro-Ukraine protesters marched to the Russian embassy where they lit candles. Hundreds of protesters also gathered in Paris to protest Moscow's aggression in Ukraine, calling on Russian troops to withdraw from all of Ukraine. Protests were also held in Estonia, Poland and Belgium. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
French President Emmanuel Macron announced he will visit China in early April, in part to seek Chinese help with ending Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Macron's statement comes after Beijing calls for a comprehensive ceasefire in Ukraine and put forward a 12-point peace plan. Meanwhile, in India, a meeting of finance chiefs of the group of 20 leading economies ended on Saturday without a consensus on Ukraine. And during his first official visit to India, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz discussed the conflict with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Daniel Rao tells us more.
A meeting of finance chiefs of the group of 20 leading economies in Bengaluru, India, drew to a close on Saturday without a consensus on Ukraine. The meeting, hosted by India, issued the G20 chair's summary and an outcome document stating that there was no agreement on the wording of the conflict. At the last major G20 meeting in Bali, Indonesia last November, leaders had strongly condemned the conflict, warning that it was intensifying fragilities in the global economy. India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman told reporters that the communique prepared for the Bengaluru meeting carried 2 paragraphs from the Bali Declaration. She said Russia and China demanded these paragraphs be deleted and said they could not be part of the final document this time around. Sitharaman said Moscow and Beijing's contention was they had approved the Bali Declaration under the then prevailing circumstances. Meanwhile, during his first official visit to India, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz sought assurances from New Delhi that it would support, or at least not block, Western efforts to isolate Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Following his talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Scholz stressed that developing countries were being negatively impacted by energy and food shortages resulting from the war. He expressed hopes that India will help secure critical supplies to Asia, Africa and the Americas. Modi maintained his cautious approach and said India wanted the conflict to be ended through dialogue and diplomacy. Scholz's delegation included several German business leaders. Among them, the head of ThyssenKrupp, which is trying to sell more of its submarines to India. India has been a major buyer of arms from Russia. Asked whether such a deal with India could be struck, Scholz said he had the impression that the quality of German technology enjoys great recognition and appreciation in the country. Dan Orwell, TVB News.
Nigerians gathered to vote on Sunday in a few parts of the country where technical and other glitches prevented a national election from taking place the previous day. Late starts and faulty registration systems were reported across polling stations amid fears of vote tampering. Election officials blamed the delays on logistical issues, but other observers pointed to the upheaval created by a redesigned currency that has left many unable to obtain banknotes. The cash shortage affected transport for voters and election workers and police officers providing security. The presidential race is to replace outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari, a retired army general. The final election tally is expected within 5 days. Still ahead on tonight's news, a collision between a speedboat and sampan in Sai Kung leaves 1 dead and 1 injured. The import of hamsters resumes. And in Macau, mask wearing in outdoor areas no longer compulsory, starting tomorrow. Welcome back to TVB News. A sampan and a speedboat collided in Sai Kung this morning, killing 1 person and injuring another. 3 men on the speedboat were arrested on suspicion of endangering the safety of others at sea. The collision occurred in Tam Chuk Wan before 10 o'clock this morning. Marine police arrived at the scene to rescue 2 men who had fallen into the sea. They were taken to the nearby Marine Police base. 1 man was airlifted to Eastern Hospital on board a government flying service helicopter. The other was confirmed dead. Last year, Hong Kong banned the import of hamsters after they were blamed for the COVID-19 Delta outbreak. The import of hamsters reportedly resumed last week, but they can only be sold after they complete quarantine and test negative for COVID. Authorities say it had resumed applications for hamsters and guinea pigs since January the 13th. So far, 3 hamster commercial import licenses have been approved. This comes about a year after 2,000 hamsters were culled, and then a ban was imposed on importing the animals into the city after they sparked a transmission chain. Experts say hamsters are very likely to infect other hamsters, but believe the laboratory tests beforehand can lower the risk of infection. Financial Secretary Paul Chan explained the rationale behind his proposals to raise government revenue to TVB News today.
In this financial year alone, the city recorded a $140 billion deficit. Speaking to TVB News, Financial Secretary Paul Chan noted Hong Kong's economic recovery remains fragile. He said one way to increase government revenue is by imposing a special football betting duty.
But betting duty is very narrowly defined, affecting only a limited number of persons. The proposal to collect $2.5 billion from them for 5 years is striking the right balance. On the one hand, giving due consideration to the competition, but at the same time, looking at their balance sheet, the operating profits over the past few years. This is something they can afford. So during this difficult time, we do ask them to chip in.
Another of his proposals was to issue $65 billion worth of government bonds each year in the coming 5 years. When asked if the suggestion has come a little too late amid soaring interest rates, Paul Chan said long-term bonds had been issued in the past 2 years when interest rates were lower. He said the bonds issued recently are short-term and the strategy will be adjusted according to global rate trends. Meanwhile, attracting foreign investment remains on the top of his agenda, but the finance chief said the authorities must secure deals first before announcing them.
Usually, for these larger companies, the deal will be a lot more complicated. The technology they are going to bring in, the number of employment they are going to create, the tangible contribution to my GDP, things like that. And in return, they may ask the government for, say, for example, injection of equity.
Chan added the expected economic growth trend for this year, set between 3.5% and 5.5%, is achievable.
In Macau, mandatory mask wearing in outdoor areas will be scrapped starting tomorrow. The move comes after local authorities said the COVID-19 pandemic in the enclave had stabilized in the past 2 months, but it is still compulsory to wear facial coverings when taking public transport, visiting medical institutions, elderly and rehabilitation homes. Infants and young children under 3 years old are exempted from wearing masks when entering any premises. Elsewhere, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, together with his daughter, appeared at a groundbreaking ceremony for a new showpiece construction project. Images showed Kim and his daughter shoveling soil at the ceremony, which was held on Saturday, according to North Korean state media. It is the third new construction project in the suburbs of Pyongyang in 3 years. Interest in Kim's daughter has grown over the past year, with the leader frequently appearing with her at big events. North Korean authorities often play up the building of new apartment blocks in the capital. The latest event comes amid reports of growing food shortages facing the country. In the U.S., a powerful winter storm that swept down the West Coast with flooding and frigid temperatures shifted its focus to Southern California on Saturday. It swelled rivers to dangerous levels and dropped snow in even low-lying areas around Los Angeles. This report from NBC News.
Life-threatening flooding in the Golden State. In Southern California's Ventura County, multiple RVs swept into the river. Watch this dramatic rescue, one of several in the region. A driver stuck in raging floodwater clings to a rescuer. They're both hoisted, swinging in the wind before safely landing on solid ground. This morning near Los Angeles, a dangerous light show. A live wire fell into the water, setting a car on fire. The historic winter weather walloped California with heavy snow.
Now we're having a little bit of trouble because the snow is making it slippery.
Torrential rain in some areas, nearly an entire month's worth in 48 hours. And strong wind gusts, creating blizzard-like conditions in the San Bernardino County mountains.
First time seeing snow in a long time.
With San Francisco seeing its lowest temperatures in over a century, and Los Angeles experiencing its first blizzard warning in more than 30 years. In San Diego, several water rescues today.
We just had a vehicle that was in the deep water, unable to drive out, and 2 occupants of the vehicle that needed to be rescued and brought back to dry land. So we anticipate doing this a few more times.
The stunning system now headed east toward Oklahoma City, Wichita, and Kansas City, where 9 million are at risk for large hail and even tornadoes. In Michigan, more than 400,000 remain without power from an ice storm earlier this week. Back in Southern California tonight, the mess the storm left behind and the dangers this system could still bring to the area.
That's the news. Thanks for watching.